Cowboys, ranchers, rock stars, and US presidents. What do all these guys have in common? The answer is one of the most iconic pieces of footwear in American history. And yes, Western boots have been a go-to for US presidents a lot longer than you think. Now, some of you guys may remember that George W. Bush had an affinity for Western boots, especially when back in Crawford, Texas on his ranch. But what you may not know is his dad, George H. Bush, had a pair made for his inauguration in 1989. Funny enough, these boots are now housed at the Bullock Texas State History Museum, which I walked by hundreds of times while a student at the University of Texas. Now, prior to George W., we had Ronald Reagan loving Western boots. A former cowboy actor turned California governor turned US president, Reagan and Nancy actually owned a ranch, and he was a pretty damn good rider. Other presidents known to have worn Western boots include Ulysses S. Grant, Teddy Roosevelt, when a member of the Rough Riders, and both Presidents Truman and Eisenhower were gifted Western boots while in office. However, the president most famous for loving his Western boots would have to be LBJ. A native Texan, Lyndon B. Johnson, grew up wearing Western boots. In fact, in the LBJ library, we can see his favorite pair of boots on display. Apparently, he wore these all over the world for over a decade, from Vietnam to Australia, out to his ranch in Texas. But interestingly, he never wore them in the Oval Office. Now, it's important to note, the fancy shoes of these US presidents, these weren't the particular boots that changed the world. No, the boots that changed the world, they're on the feet of the everyday man, the rancher that's in his saddle by 5 a.m. They're being worn by the roughneck who's putting in a 24-hour shift, the cowboy that's out till midnight bringing in that lost calf. Gents, to understand how this boot changed the world, you first have to understand its history, its story. You need to understand what it is and what it's not. Now, a Western boot, by definition, is a specific type of riding boot. They have a high heel, traditionally made of stacked leather, rounded, squared, or chiseled toes, a high shaft of at least 6 inches, and no lacing. Now, the most common material they're made from is cowhide. However, you're going to find other skins like goat, alligator, snake, ostrich, lizard, and so on. Now, when it comes to Western boots, there are two main styles. You're going to have the classic cowboy, and you are also going to have the roper. Now, as you can see, they look similar, but there are some obvious differences. The biggest one being shaft height and heel height. And if I had to summarize the difference in just a couple words, cowboy boots are made more for riding. Ropers are made more for the working man who's spending more time on his feet. Now, gents, if you're in the market for a pair of boots, then go check out today's sponsor, Tecovas. Now, gents, as a Texan, Tecovas have been on my radar for a while, and I love the fact that they have focused in on quality, timeless style, and the comfort of the boots. Tecovas makes their boots so they're comfortable day one. Now, the boots I have right here are their Cartwrights. It's one of their best sellers. It is in Scotch, and the material is goat. And in case you don't know, one of the great things about goat leather is how comfortable and how soft and supple it is. Now, as I was saying earlier, boots come in a wide variety of different styles when it comes to the silhouette. So if you're looking for something that's more dated, a little bit shorter of a heel, shorter of a shaft, definitely check out a pair of their Earls. Or maybe you want a pair of square toes, check out their style called the Dock. Or if you're just getting into boots, you already got 10 pairs, but you don't like a wide shaft, check out their Deans. These are a zipped boot with a thin shaft that still have the classic design silhouette at the bottom, but if you're going to be wearing these with a tapered jean, these are going to work perfectly with that style of trouser. And if goat leather isn't your thing, you want a classic calfskin? Well, of course, Tecovas got you covered. They are a boot maker. They've got tons of options when it comes to all different types of materials. Ostrich, alligator, crocodile, lizard, python. Yeah, get over to their website, gents. These guys have tons of different styles, different materials, some really great looking boots. If you're a boot lover, but you've never been able to find a pair of boots that fits you properly, that is comfortable the first day you put it on, guys, you need to check out Tecovas. And on a side note, beginning of this year, I was in Atlanta, Georgia. I was out shopping and randomly came across one of their stores. I have to say that I loved it. I was impressed, not only with their selection of footwear, but their clothing is actually really cool. I also thought it was nice how they give you a complimentary drink, a free shoe shine. And as you can see here, they've got stores all over the United States. So get in there, check them out, and just try on a pair of boots and see what it's like. Guys, I will tell you, once you find a pair of boots that fits you, that looks good, not only you're going to be 2 to 3 inches taller, but once you start wearing Western boots, all of a sudden your confidence is going to start to soar. So gents, if you're looking for a pair of boots made by hand with 200 individual steps, we're talking quality, stylish boots using premium bovine and exotic leathers that will fit you like a glove and be incredibly comfortable, gents, you need to check out Tecovas. I'm linking to Tecovas down in the description of today's video with the best deal you're going to find on the web. Go check them out if you're looking for a great pair of Western boots to level up your style. Now, when it comes to the history, the lineage of the Western boot, it's actually a bit muddled. From my research, there were two main influences. You had the Spanish influence and you had the English influence. Now, riding boots in of themselves had been around since men had started riding horses. But the first boot that we can recognize as possibly being a predecessor of the Western boot was a Spanish boot known as the botas vaqueras. This boot was specifically designed for horseback riding in the 16th century and was worn by the Spanish vaqueros that went on to explore the New World. Designed for stirrup use, they had a large heel, they had pointy toes for getting into the stirrup. Now, one thing about the botas vaqueras is the shaft wasn't very high. It just barely covered the ankles. It did not protect the calves. On the English side, we had a number of custom-made riding boots being worn by military officers and noblemen that could afford this luxury as early as the 1600s, but became much more common during the 17th century. Now, the most famous of these boots was named after the Duke of Wellington, who in 1815 defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. The portrait and later picture passed around of the Duke riding his mount with the boots very visible. All of a sudden, they became a style icon. And as you can see, the Wellington is a very different style than the botas vaqueras. It had a very high shaft that fully covered the calves, and its heel was not nearly as large. So as you can imagine, we've got one style of riding boot coming up from the south out of Mexico. We've got another one coming out of the east from England. When these styles hit, when they merged, another interesting phenomenon was happening. That third factor was more economic than design. It turns out that the cowboys from the 1850s to the 1890s, these guys had a lot of excess cash. Now, I'm not saying they were wealthy. No, they had cash because these guys were driving cattle down from Texas, down from Oklahoma, all the way up into Kansas, and occasionally Missouri, Nebraska, or Wyoming. But my point is, once these guys got to their destination, they got paid in cash. And guess what? Like modern day sailors, when they're in port, they want to spend that money. So these endpoints on the cattle drive trail became hotspots for merchants that had wares to sell to these cowboys. And guess what? A great pair of boots, because your other pair had been torn up, was high on the list. Now, a guy named Charles Heyer out of Kansas in approximately 1875, he is credited with being the father of the Western boot by mass producing them for the cowboys who were in his town and just demanded them. Now, this is a point for debate, and you guys can argue all you want down in the comments, especially Texans, because they want to claim that the boot was ours, which I want to believe, but the reality is when these guys were down in Texas, they pretty much had spent all their money. It was in Kansas that they were unloading. In addition, it would have been in the early 1870s, because as a lot of you guys know, when it comes to shoe manufacturing, so the first automated, machinery where they started mass producing shoes was about like 1812, 1815. It really started picking on in 1850, and then it wasn't really till the 1890s, 1900 that almost all shoes started to be mass manufactured. So that 1875 period is when still a lot of shoes were being made by hand. And that's when we would see that best of the South getting mixed with that best of the East. The higher shaft of the Wellington getting mixed in with that silhouette, with that heel, with the toe shape of the vaquero boots. Yeah, it was in this time period when we saw the two different styles all of a sudden start to have their children because the cattleman had money, he wanted a functional design, and mass manufacturing was still in its infancy. So it's safe to say in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, we saw tons of different styles of Western boots. High shafts, low shafts, decorative shafts, plain shafts, flat heels, tall heels. At this point, in this particular area of Kansas, we had some of those skilled bootmakers coming in out of the old world, setting up shop in the new world, serving a clientele that was flush with cash, who had particular needs for a functional boot that could wear hard, protect his legs, and keep him in the saddle. Now, with all that history, that's why, in part, you're going to see so many different styles of Western boots. When you see the taller heel out there, known as the Cuban heel, this is about 2 inches, that has the history with the vaquero boot. The roper heel, much lower. This one is made more for walking. It has history with the Wellington boot. And the classic walking heel that we see on the Western boot, this is made as a compromise to be able to get the best of both. It's going to keep you in the saddle, and it's relatively easy to walk in. Now, that being said, Western boots did bring in a number of very unique features. First up, the style and decoration of the shaft. A lot of those cowboys that would order a pair of boots, they would order a couple. One that they would wear on the trail, another pair that they would wear out in town. Those town boots, those city boots, they oftentimes had colors, decorations right here in the shaft, or were made from a contrasting color to allow the cowboy to be able to show off his style. Yeah, even back then, your great-great-great-grandfather wanted to look good. Another interesting detail is going to be the stitching right here on the upper. Nowadays, it's more decorative, but on older leathers, especially the thicker leathers, this stitching right here would actually make the leather more pliable and less susceptible to cracking over time. Today, the stitching is just a vestige of a sign of quality that our grandfathers had to look for. Another detail unique to Western boots, the pull strap. As the name implies, this helps you pull the boots on first thing in the morning. And having said all of that, let's get to the question at the very beginning of this video. How did this boot change the world? Well, gentlemen, if I were to show this silhouette to a person over in Japan, over in France, down in Australia or South Africa, it's safe to say that they would identify them as cowboy boots. And if you ask that same person, what do those boots embody? What feelings do they evoke? He's probably going to say freedom, independence, rugged individualism. The fact is, in the short history of the United States, the cowboy boot is by far the most iconic piece of clothing we have exported to the world. Not only is this piece of footwear incredibly functional, but it has symbolism that goes beyond the leather it's made from. Agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then go check out this one. I'll talk about why the cowboy is one of the most iconic style icons ever. Because if you want to talk about hats, you want to hear more about shirts and all the other pieces, check it out. I do talk a little bit about boots, but it's a great video. I loved it, and I think you will too. Boom, go check it out. Yeah, right there.